Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. In this episode, we explore a game-changing opportunity for nonprofits collaborating with universities to strengthen impact, build capacity, and access valuable resources for free or at very low costs. Dr. Elizabeth Searing, a nonprofit management professor, and Salman, a second-year PhD student, break down how nonprofits can leverage university partnerships for internships, fellowships, research projects, and strategic support. We discuss the common misconceptions about working with universities, why most nonprofits aren't reaching out enough, and how to navigate academic partnerships effectively, even if you're a small nonprofit with limited resources. Salman shares his firsthand insight with working on real-world nonprofit projects, including a deep dive into financial data analysis with Charity Navigator. Plus, we uncover specific strategies for finding the right facilities, academic programs, or student initiatives that aligns with your nonprofit's mission. And at the end, we answer the critical question, at what stage should a nonprofit approach a university for help? You'll leave this episode with practical steps on starting to leverage academic partnerships today and a new perspective on how universities can become key allies in your nonprofit's growth. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having us.
Yes, and I know you have one of your students, Salman, here. He is a second-year PhD student. Thank you, Salman, for being here. I know you're going to share some of your insight on some experience that you had with working with some nonprofits with the university. So we're going to loop you in towards the end and get your insight on how that has been so far. So this episode is all about how nonprofits can work with universities. And I really want to kind of dive right in with my first question is, what are some of those common misconceptions that nonprofits have about working with universities? Because I think a lot of nonprofits don't even know it's possible, or they might think that maybe their nonprofit's way too small to even, be able to work with a large university.
Well, and I hear exactly what it is that you mean, because most of the time when I am working with my colleagues in the field, they're very surprised to hear that, in fact, we do more at universities than just teach and do research. And so I think there are a couple misconceptions about universities. And the first is that there are no nonprofit related classes. So maybe 30 years ago, there weren't any classes specifically about nonprofit management. But now I am willing to bet that there is a university near you that has multiple nonprofit courses in it, and potentially even a nonprofit certificate or degree plan. And so there actually are nonprofit related courses. You can major in this in college if you want. And there are always a lot of offerings normally for postgraduate education as well. And so even like within the scope of what we think universities traditionally do, there is nonprofit stuff there. But I think that there's also a misconception maybe that, teaching is all that we do, or maybe with a little bit of research, and we're kind of, the professors are locked in this ivory tower and we're not really interested in what's going on outside of it. And just that is 100% not right, especially for nonprofit faculty. Because even those of us that are at the nerdiest of the nerdy universities, so what we call R1s, research universities, we are still very, very interested in building the capacity of our local community. We wouldn't be in this space if we weren't profoundly motivated by what was actually happening, what is actually working in the nonprofit sector. And I think the third misconception is that it all costs money. So that, doing anything with a university, like they're these, big institutions, or maybe a small institution that's really, a private, institution, and it must cost an absolute, ton of money, just like any other consultant. And that's also normally wrong, because we have all sorts of resources that are either discounted or in many cases free, depending on what it is that you need. So the relationship, depending on what program or university you're working with, might feel like a consulting relationship, like you're getting, real goods and services. You are working with someone. You are actually making progress. But it may not cost you much of anything, if anything at all. Many of our projects do not come with any cost to the nonprofit. And so I would definitely think that those three things are holding people back, and they definitely do not need to.
With having so many more nonprofit related courses at a university now, does it make sense to have a nonprofit that's maybe looking for internships or interns to kind of reach out to maybe some of the professors that teach those classes to see if they have a student that might help them in some area of their nonprofit over the summer? How many people actually or nonprofits reach out to the professors of those classes and ask for those resources?
Well, not enough, for sure, which is unfortunate, because not only do we have students that are interested in having an internship, but some of our degrees actually require students to have an internship. And so we have all of these students that really need an internship in order to graduate. But if the professor or the Office of Career Relations or whomever it is that coordinates those internships don't have enough, we're having to send students that are, otherwise really, really good and motivated to be a part of the nonprofit sector. And we're having to send them over to the private sector just because we don't have enough internships. So I think there's definitely a supply of students that that are there and available and potentially need to work for nonprofits. So definitely do not let that hold you back. But I also want to mention that even though internships are kind of the first thing that we tend to think about in terms of what is available for nonprofits from universities, that's really only the tip of the iceberg. So yes, there are internships there so that you can have a student, one or more, come and serve as an intern for a semester or two at your nonprofit. But there are also normally a lot of other options. So, for example, there are fellowships. So that is when a student is potentially paid money in order to not be an intern, which can be kind of free form, like they show up and, maybe they're helping with social media, maybe they're doing something else. Intern is more almost like an employee. For fellowships, those tend to be very project focused. And so if you have a specific project that you want done, there may be a fellowship program at the university that would, fit your need perfectly. There's also class projects. And so some faculty use what's called experiential learning or service learning. And the key to this type of teaching is being able to work with a nonprofit organization actually during the course of the semester. So it's kind of like if you ever get your hair cut or anything like that at a barber school, where it costs a little bit less, but you're part of the learning process. It's kind of like that. So like when I teach strategic planning, I always make sure that as I'm teaching the students what it's like to go through a strategic plan, step by step, what it looks like, we are always working with one or more nonprofits who are also interested in having a strategic planning experience. And so depending on how well your needs fit what it is that is happening in that class, you might have access to a whole bunch of students and not just one intern. And then there's also being able to research with faculty. So they're depending on what your question is, what it is that the faculty person is working on. They are normally very interested in data. Like some faculty want to be paid in money. A lot of faculty, maybe like me, enjoy being paid in data because data is what helps generate that research that pulled us into, this particular line of work in the first place. And so this is where sometimes if any of these things are going to cost money, the research might, depending on what it is that you need done, how much of the professor's time you need. But depending on what it is that you need done, like if you want to know what the, baseline level of unemployment is in your region, 100%, there is some professor that is going to be able to answer that question. It really is just kind of finding that person, communicating, and then moving forward. But there are all these different types of resources that are available through your university.
Can you give me a couple more examples of some resources other than fellowships and internships that might be probably the most valuable ones?
So I can give you some examples of what these can be like, because I think that those are kind of flexible.
Yeah.
So like the Connect Fellowship is something that we have at University of Texas at Dallas. And what these are, they are totally free to a nonprofit because we have our own funders for that program. And it is a single graduate student that is matched to a single nonprofit that has submitted a data-related project. And so our most requested project, our most popular item on the menu is a 3-step process that starts with a logic model and then moves into a data metric assembly and then a data plan. So it's built around being able to help a nonprofit understand what data it needs to collect and actually in order to actually prove that it is making an impact. And so we run between 5 and 10 of these projects every semester. I would say about half of them are that logic model data plan kind of combination. But the key to the Connect Fellowship is that it is about anything data related. And so we also have really, technologically sophisticated projects. Like we worked with an organization out of Guatemala that put together a real-time kind of map that looked at where there were different types of clinics, both from the nonprofit and from the government, in order to better serve the needs of the individuals that were on the ground and looking for that type of medical care. And so which projects move forward kind of depend on what the strongest match is between the two of them. And just a shameless plug here. We open up our Connect Fellowship application in a couple weeks. So depending on when this airs, this is something where you could quite literally log in and fill out an application and be considered for this because we're not bound by geography with the Connect Fellowships. But to give another kind of example of the class project, so we worked with Charity Navigator this past semester on a research project involving their metrics. And so many of the people that listen to this podcast may be familiar with Charity Navigator. And they have different types of beacons and ways that they evaluate and kind of illuminate different aspects of nonprofits. And so they worked with one of my classes, a whole PhD class, and Salman may tell us a little bit about this toward the end of the podcast. But they worked with 10 PhD students in order to essentially take all of this big pile of data about the nonprofit sector in the U.S. And kind of take put together some insights from the data, where are we as a field? What does this look like? And kind of what the metrics that Charity Navigator was looking at. And we wanted to see what those metrics looked like before, during, and after COVID as well. And so this is a project where, they could have hired a private consultant. They could have worked with me directly for research, but what worked best was being able to work through me and work with a class in order to have, the experience of 10 different researchers kind of working on this project, which was really unique for me and very, very exciting.
And so, if we were to, get a nonprofit listening today, and they want to basically find the right facility, find the right resources, like where is the perfect place for them to start? Like, how do they just get started? Whether it's research or reaching out, where can they start?
I think the best place to start is one, a local university or college near wherever they are. This doesn't mean that you're locked into them for sure, but it is easier for you to drop by, talk to the class. Working with that local or more local college just might be easier in terms of scheduling or things like that. But it's not a necessity. And so at whatever university or college it is that you pick, I recommend finding the faculty person that teaches the nonprofit courses. One, because they are going to be, familiar with what it is that you do, but also they are going to have an idea of where else in the university, if they're not the right person, where else it is that you need to go. So, for example, if a nonprofit comes to me and says that, what we really need is an intern. And I'll say, that is fantastic. Let me put you in touch with this, office over here, because they're the ones that handle the system that handles, all of the internships for the college. But I know that because I'm the one interfacing with nonprofits and I'm used to that request. And so finding the faculty person, and you can do this just by, a Google search, or looking, I would look first in the Department of Public Administration or Government, because that's where about 2/3 of the nonprofit professors are employed in the US, is actually in schools of public service or public administration, not the business school. But look there first, or use a Google search, find us and reach out over email, because we can help you avoid, knowing whether you're supposed to be talking to the Office of Community and Foundation Relations, which exists at UT Dallas, or the Office of Student Volunteerism, which also works, exists at UT Dallas. We'll have had to figure out which one of those you are supposed to be talking to. And if we can't, hook you up with the right resources, we will know who it is that you need to talk to, and we can sort that out and get you connected to the right spot.
And after you reach out by email or phone call, do you think it's beneficial to actually visit in person and meet the professors, go to the school? Or nowadays, is it not necessary anymore?
I think it is. It's a nice touch. It'll depend on the faculty person. So depending on what university is near you or that you might already have a relationship with, it may, work for them, or it may not. So for example, many of the graduate classes I teach right now are online and asynchronous. So that means that we are most of the classes are on Zoom or Teams, and we actually don't even meet at the same time. They're watching my lectures or getting together in groups and things like that. So having a traditional, guest lecture or classroom visit would be really kind of hard for me. And so I'll record different conversations with the nonprofit partners that we work with. But them showing up at my office, even if I'm there, really doesn't have a whole lot of benefit to them or to the students that they might be working with. But it can still depend. So I still go to my office. I still, have lunches and coffees and stuff like that. So it's really just kind of up to the situation that the class or the students might be in, and also just the preferences of the nonprofit and the professor. Plus, I found that even in the kind of online asynchronous space that I teach in, it's often really beneficial, especially for those one-on-ones like internships or fellowships, to coordinate some kind of visit to the nonprofit. Because that just gives a whole lot of insight to how things run on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of times that's what my students are being brought in to do, is kind of, sort things out, put that logic model together. And so we're normally more than happy to come to the nonprofit, in addition to anyone from the nonprofit coming to us.
Yeah, I can see that going to the nonprofit is pretty much a necessity, especially for these students to see the facility, meet the people, meet the founders, the volunteers, the people that they help, so that they can, one, get exposed to that experience, but then just learn more about the mission, right? So, what do you feel are the best strategies for identifying the right facility or academic program that aligns with the nonprofit's mission?
Well, I think there are a couple thoughts here. The first is to kind of have an idea of what you want ahead of time. So it can be tempting, especially if you're a small nonprofit, you're overwhelmed, to just kind of show up and say, hey, professor, I need help. It may feel like that opens the possibilities, but it's kind of difficult, because especially if you haven't talked to this person before, they may not know what it is that you need. So I would say have an idea of what you are shopping for. It's like going to the grocery store. You always buy all sorts of stuff maybe you don't need. If you show up at the grocery store, you don't know what you want and you're hungry. So don't show up at the professor's office if you don't know what you want and you're hungry. Otherwise, you might be walking out of there with impulse purchases that, you may not have intended. So I would say have an idea of what you want ahead of time, but also kind of know what resources you have to engage with it. So earlier I mentioned that this was kind of like a consulting relationship. Regardless of whether you're paying for it, you're still working with someone else. And so be sure that you have the time to devote to it, depending on what it is that you are looking for: internship, research, partner with a class. That'll have an influence, but in my experience, the projects like this that are the most successful are ones where you've got, an hour a week or every week or two, just in order to maintain that relationship and kind of keep things going on track. Just like you would never want a consultant to show up, talk to you for an hour and then 3 months later come back with a final deliverable. You don't want whatever it is that you're getting from a university to be like that either. So make sure that you do have at least enough time to help kind of manage the relationship in order to get what it is that you really want.
Do you find that a lot of nonprofits that reach out to you, they kind of have that idea of what they're looking for ahead of time? Or some of them like, hey, I heard this is possible, and what could you do for me, type of thing?
I think that it's more toward what is possible. But one of the things that I always try and do, like when I meet a nonprofit for the first time, I'll have what in consulting language would be a scoping conversation. So even nonprofits that apply for something specific, like the Connect Fellowship program, they'll submit in order to apply for the Connect Fellowship, you have to have some kind of program idea. So like, this is the project that we want help with. Even when they think they know what they want, I will in fact have a call with them to really find out what the needs are. There is going to be, hopefully, a conversation of kind of discovery and talking more about what it is that you really need. And this can happen, even if you went in thinking you know exactly what you want. Maybe there's something we got to do ahead of time. So a lot of these logic models are driven by something that has been told to somebody by a funder. Maybe you didn't get the grant because you didn't have, anything put together to demonstrate your impact from the program you've already been running. And so a nonprofit will show up and say, hey, we got denied a grant because we don't keep track of things. so help me keep track of things. How do I show impact? And so many more organizations will show up kind of with that broad need. And then we figure out exactly what it is that we need to do. Like, do we need to go back to, the logic model and piecing it all together? Maybe you already have one of those. But I think anything where you can show up with an idea of kind of knowing yourself, knowing what your pain points are, then that helps us kind of get a better grasp of, how we might be able to help, because that's something that most nonprofit faculty I work with are very careful about. And that is, we know that you know what you do best. So we are not here to, lecture you on what it is that, how we think that you should be, deploying your services. We don't, that's not what we do. So we are here to help you make the world a better place. And so the questions that we ask are really just trying to explore what that need is so we can more precisely match you with whatever resources we have access to. So don't feel inhibited if you don't know exactly what it is that you want, but don't feel insulted if you think you know exactly what you want, but we still have questions.
Yeah. And maybe it goes a different direction, right? You have to be open-minded to what's the possibilities, right? So I think this is great. Yep, go ahead. Finish your point.
And just to add, it's also not a one and done either. So a lot of these initial kind of reach outs and conversations are more about kind of putting the plan together for an ongoing relationship. Maybe you just need one small thing done, but a lot of organizations that we work with will do one thing and then they'll do another. So we'll have someone that comes in and, does a Connect Fellow at first, but then decides that they also want to have interns, or they'll come in for a Connect Fellowship and then this will lead to another project. And so they apply for another Connect Fellowship the next time that we run the program. So it's one of the ways that universities got a bad name was because, like an INGO, they would swoop in, deploy knowledge, and then fly away. And so much of what we do is not designed to be like that. So don't think that you've only got one shot. We are members of the community as universities and as faculty, individual people. And so we're building relationships, not just working a problem.
Well, I think this is great information. I want to get Salman's point of view from the student side that has actually worked with some of these nonprofits. So Salman, I want to ask you a couple questions. And then Elizabeth, I got one final question for you before we wrap up. But Salman, real quick, you've been working with nonprofits. What were some of the skills and experience is that you basically attained or gained from working with some of these nonprofits?
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about it. So just to give you a brief backstory. So the project or the class that I took was with Dr. Searing, who is here with us today. And we primarily worked on a project which was given by Charity Navigator to help analyze and refine some of the metrics that they were working on their beacons. If you are familiar with it, that's how they name it. So me and a group of two other PhD students, we primarily worked on the financial metrics. And the skills that I learned was really valuable because this is one of the classes that I will remember because how, like the bridge, when you're working on something and you feel like you're contributing to a real world problem, that really helps you understand or helps you encouraged to or motivated to work more towards it. So I would say the primary work that I did there was mainly, first of all, gathering data from IRS 990. We cleaned the data, we analyzed it statistically, and then also we provided some insights or some recommendation to Charity Navigator, what different metrics might work and how those are compared to each other. So it was a really great opportunity to apply some academic theories to real world challenges. And if I could talk a little bit more about the skills that I learned, um, one thing I would say is that the application of working with the financial data in the statistical softwares really helped me learn about this software, as well as learn about how the financial world really works in the nonprofit sector. And at the same time, I would say the primary benefit of really working for a nonprofit, in compared to just working like a theory-based class, is that you feel motivated, you feel really encouraged that you're contributing to something, and it might have some implication towards that for the nonprofit to refine their metric, and so it creates a sense of achievement or like encouragement for the students, especially in the PhD. Since we're doing a PhD, it might help us to bridge that gap between the practitioner and the academic world.
And did you work with, one main contact at the nonprofit, or how was that kind of the bridge or the between kind of the university and the nonprofit? How did you get the information or the tasks to do on a daily basis, and who did you communicate those to?
So since this was a class, like a PhD level class, so our primary contact was our instructor or professor, which is Dr. Searing, and she basically was the connection. So she used to go back and forth between Charity Navigator and our students, and she used to delegate tasks on whatever was needed to be done. So we had a syllabus, like what to do and our end goal. So throughout the whole semester, it was a long semester, the fall of 2024. So we worked for nearly like 4 months to gather data and analyze those data, and also we had a meeting with Charity Navigator as well. So overall, it was a really uh, intense, I would say, project work, because all 10 students were grouped into different groups, and we worked on different. So I worked on finance data, but the other team was probably working on fundraising or governance or some aspect of the entire nonprofit sector. So we covered everything, and the project was also very detailed, and it was very, I would say, stat heavy. We did as much quantitative analysis as we could. So I believe, I hope it will help Charity Navigator in some way, or even if it doesn't, paves the way for other instructors and other students to be encouraged to be in that sort of a class where we are directly working with a nonprofit.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks so much for sharing that story, and it's great to actually hear some firsthand knowledge from somebody, a student that actually was there to influence and help a nonprofit, through some of these programs. So here's my last question, Elizabeth. We have nonprofits that listen to the show. I wrote a whole book called The $1 Million Nonprofit that basically takes a nonprofit from zero revenue to over $1 million in revenue. At what stage do you feel a nonprofit's a good candidate to kind of approach a university to maybe ask for help or ask for some resources? Is there a certain maturity level that you suggest being at before or to really get the most impact from the experience? Or is it really kind of open to all different levels for different, skills or tasks needed?
I think that's a good question. I think that naturally all organizations of all sizes could benefit. But I think that organizations that are under 1 million stand to gain the most, because it's all about building capacity. I feel like every day you wake up, it's about, well, what can I do today with what I've got? And what I've got is the constraint on the being able to actually make a difference in the way that you're hoping. And it's the, under 1 million that, and I mean all the way down to, just starting up, that this need for capacity is where universities can help the most, because the organizations that I work with in strategic planning, the organizations that I work with in financial management, the organizations that I work with for my broad management class, the organizations are normally smaller because if money was no object, then they would go hire some pricey consultant. But they're not. They come to, they come to me with a particular need, say, I really want, to have a strategic plan, or they're referred to me by somebody. So in that way, it's kind of like a doctor, where I'll be talking to a funder, and the funder will say, hey, I, met this organization. They applied for this grant. I think that eventually they'll be a good candidate, but they really need to work a little bit on what their vision is, or they really need to work a little bit on program evaluation. Do you have a way to work with them and kind of hook them up with some resources? So organizations kind of come to me in all kinds of different ways. But I think that the desire to build capacity is what the qualifier is. And really all of us want to do more. But the organizations that can't afford to hire the consulting shops to help them do more, I think those are the best fit for, at least for most of what it is that I do on a day-to-day.
Well, and I think it goes back to one of the first things you said, where not enough nonprofits are reaching out. And I would assume that, universities want more nonprofits to reach out, because they need them and the projects and the students to get involved to kind of help, manage or maintain the classes, or put these projects in place. So I can see why, don't be afraid. If you're a small nonprofit listening, don't be afraid to reach out. Like, they want nonprofits to reach out. They want to help. And I think it's just a win-win all around.
100%. And I think that, even nonprofits that are used to reaching out to universities for like volunteer weekend, maybe you already work with your university because you get a couple fraternities and sororities to, do something once a year. It's just, there's so much more available to you than that. So I just want to make sure that everyone listening knows that there is really no end to the resources and the creativity that you can work with at your local university. And if you've already got a relationship with them for volunteer weekend, that's great. But don't be afraid to look beyond volunteer weekend, because your needs for capacity are greater than that. And our ability to connect you with resources can definitely help you meet that need.
Wow, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this. And I think a lot of this is going to open up a lot of doors for nonprofits to think outside the box and reach out to the local universities and ask for that help. And even if you don't know what to do next in your nonprofit, I guarantee somebody at the university can kind of help you. And even if it's just a student coming in and doing a strategic plan for you, I think that will, one, put you on the path to success. But two, just get that momentum going of just getting one thing done and off your plate so you can focus on the next thing, so that you can basically just drive your mission forward. So Elizabeth, Salman, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today. This has been great.
Thank you again for having us. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.